Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host. And today I have Kim and Todd Saxton, and they are professors at
Buffalo. We're now at the University at Buffalo.
So tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Well, this fall, we will have been married almost 36 years. So how crazy is that? So we met our first jobs in consulting, where we helped companies plan some of their growth strategies. Then we went back and got our PhDs, and I'm in marketing, and Todd is in entrepreneurship and strategy. And we taught at Indiana University for more than 20 years. And then this summer, we quote unquote retired from Indiana University and moved to Buffalo. And now we teach full time at the University at Buffalo, which is the SUNY Systems flagship university.
Fantastic. And I think it's, first of all, you're my first couple that I've had on the show. So I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
We are honored.
And I love teaching. I'm passionate. I used to run colleges and I started as a teacher. And then now we have books that look very similar to each other and that talk about the Titanic and icebergs. So let's just get into it. As you talk about, you've helped hundreds of different startups. You've been involved in different startups. And so ladies and gents who are listening to this, running a business is not easy, as you know. Most startups are going to fail within the first 3, if not 5 years. And so the whole reason I wanted them to come on is to talk about some of those icebergs that are in the water that we don't really see. And so you wrote the book, The Titanic Effect. Why don't you talk about that first, and then we'll get into business.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So the Titanic Effect came about, just as you're saying, we were meeting with hundreds a year, thousands, if you were to add up the 20-something years that we've been working with startups and small businesses. And we just kept seeing the same questions pop up over and over again. And so what we kind of likened them to is decisions or mistakes often. So some decisions lead to mistakes. Where, because you don't have a lot of information, you make a choice and you're not really aware of all of those underlying things, those icebergs that are attached to that choice. And so in the book, we tried to call out 32 of these decisions that tend to create stress and can cause more problems than people anticipate. And so our goal was just to say, here are these issues. And so just keep your eyes open while you're trying to make those choices, because they could have these consequences that you might not have thought of.
Fantastic and very true. So what are some of those sources of failures?
Well, it kind of started in the technical debt area, and particularly technical entrepreneurs in your audience might be familiar with that term. But for those that are not as familiar, you have to make choices of investing in your tech platform early on. But as you start to grow, or as you start to move in different directions, sometimes those decisions were either the wrong decisions or have to be adjusted. And technical debt are those decisions you make when you're just not sure where you're heading. But then as you move in a new direction, you have this debt that you have to kind of pay off by investing, rebuilding the platform, or moving in a new direction. So that was kind of one big anchor category that our co-author on the book, Michael Cloran, who's a serial tech entrepreneur, was doing a lot of speaking about. But based on our conversations and experiences, particularly with first-time entrepreneurs, there were these other categories of decisions that they were making about the people that they brought on as investors, advisors, co-founders. And that's what we call the human ocean, kind of extending that metaphor of the Titanic. And then in Kim's area, the marketing kind of side of things, where you choose a brand and you choose your initial messaging, and then you have to pivot or move in a new direction. And you have these debts because you've been communicating in a certain way for a year or more. And now it's not that you're starting with a blank slate. People actually have an association of what your company does or what you as an individual are doing, and you have to change. So that's the marketing kind of debt side of things. And then the strategy is kind of how all of those different pieces fit together. So we started with these 4 different, again, what we call oceans of the human side of things, the market side of things, the technical, and then the strategy that kind of pulls it together. And then, as Kip said, identified some what we call debtbergs or icebergs in each of those oceans.
Yeah, so I think the 2 kind of biggest mistakes we tend to talk about is one in the human ocean is your co-founders. And, you know, some people go it alone, and there are some challenges with just being a solopreneur. And then other people, you know, we call it the curse of threesies. For whatever reason, it seems like a lot of times 3 people get together, right? And it's just like, you've seen 3 friends. There's always one odd man out, you know, and they start out best buds. They don't write anything down. They don't have explicit roles described because those are tough conversations. And then 6 months later, everybody's mad at Barb because Barb hasn't done anything, but Barb already got 1/3 of the business. And so we talk about how to have those conversations, but also how to not give up equity early. Like, you have to earn it. So a lot of startups best practice is to vest your ownership over time. One of our alums recently announced that he was finally fully vested at 5 years of running this startup, and now he's fully vested. So that's a good piece of advice. And then the other biggest one we find in the marketing ocean is it's 2 sides of the same coin, but it's like, we're so new, there's nobody like us. You know, we're out in the blue ocean, and we say, and the sharks are attacking because nobody can find you. You know, so instead of trying to be so revolutionary, new, and different, how about be something that everybody knows, but just do it better? So identify what your point of differentiation is. And a lot of times startups are not really clear about why somebody should choose them over existing options.
I'm having PTSD because so, I mean, I have a master's in business. I used to teach all these classes and things, and I got into a business with, as you said, there was actually 4 of us. There should not have ever been 4 of us. And you're right. We started out where I was never intending, because of my own job and what I was doing, I was helping with money. Like, I gave some, and you had this other partner that was supposed to put 2.5 times that amount. And it turned out, so he got a ton of equity in this company and ended up never putting a dime in. And long story short, we ended up having to let him go. But that equity never came to me. And I ended up 4 times the investment that I was planning to put in. And then my partner came, and she was mad because I wasn't working the business. And I said, whoa, wait a second. You know how much money? Like, I paid your salary plus for the entire year. And so it was very interesting to see that dynamic. And then she ended up running the business to the ground and closed it, and I was out a whole lot of money because of that. And I remember going to lunch one time, and they made the comment, well, Charisse, you're just mad because we're making so much money. And I said, yeah, you're right, because to get this business going, you should be making half your salary, and you guys, you know, still you're producing. And no matter what I ever said, it just didn't matter. And so because of that, I closed my purse strings and just took the loss and moved forward.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they don't have those conversations. And if they do, like, what's going to happen if we don't agree? Who makes that deciding factor? How do we get around it? And there's so many pitfalls that happen, or as we talk about, icebergs.
Yeah. And I think it's important. We do point out in the book, I'm not sure we give it enough attention, but in the human ocean particularly, that's not just limited to co-founders and investors, but your family is part of that, your friends, your colleagues, and decisions you make that take time or resources away from those other folks are also things you need to be very mindful of and have frank discussions about, because I would say being a mompreneur or a dadpreneur, starting a business can have as much of a cost and as many hidden debts with your partner as with any other individual that you might be working with.
I agree. And I hired a coach once that I was going to do everything she told me to do because it worked for her, it worked for other people, so I was going to do that. And we have to remember that maybe something works in one industry or in one market, but it doesn't necessarily work in another. And so like what she does, she's huge on, well, I'm not going to say because that'll give it away, but what I found is one day I sat down and I did all my accounting and I realized how much money that I was spending because she's like, oh, you have to have this program. You talk about technical debt. You have to have
Mhm.
this program, this program, this program. And before I knew it, like my closings were paying for all of these programs and things. And I thought, so I'm working to pay my credit card. That's not very effective anymore. So fired all of that, got rid of all of that, doing very well without it. And so I think that it's important to look at, as you talk about, what is important and really analyze what is necessary, especially in a startup, because she's been doing it for 20 years. I hadn't been. And so of course she's going to be using all this stuff, and I don't need it yet.
Yeah, that's a challenge. We do a lot of work with small businesses too. I mean, tech tools can be very useful. I mean, and so you have to figure out when's the right time to bring those tech tools in. You can easily be overpaying for tech you don't really need. But at some point in time, if you're doing everything manually, first of all, you're not as good as something that's automated. And also the amount of time it takes, there is a point at which it makes sense to free your time up for other things by offloading these easy to do things. And so I can remember working with a small business and it was really a startup and they had been running all these events and each event was on a separate Excel spreadsheet and they'd never put all the spreadsheets together to see like who goes to how many events, like how many total customers do they have and all that. And then they were doing renewals by hand. And so eventually, they got to have like 300 people. And then finally they said, okay, let's put the system together. And it took 2 weeks of time manually to get the whole thing together. But then they realized, oh, how many people never came back and how many people are doing everything and how many people are, picking things out. And then when they looked at the renewals, they could automate that. And then when people were not renewing, then they, could start to think about a whole different payment process, almost a different business model based on that data. So that data can be really useful. But at first, it just made sense to just do each one independently and very manually. So at some point in time, you have to figure out when that time is that you can use these tools to help.
I agree with that. And even people, so tools and people, I was putting stamps on my postcards to send out and I'm like, okay, because I let everybody they all went back to school, right? So I'm like, okay, it's time to find somebody new because this is ridiculous. I'm not putting stamps on postcards anymore. And so I think it's important. You're right. Automation is key. So is using your time effectively.
Yeah, and we do cover in the book, when's the time to hire your first employee, right? Because it's not just a single thing, it's a nested decision about your time, your resources. And often at the beginning, you don't really know how a person could help you, right? You have to develop some sort of a system or standard operating procedures, and then you can start to outsource that. And as you say, college interns are a great source.
It is. And so that's my next question is a lot of people think, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but a lot of people think that they have to hire like their assistant, a full-time assistant. And what is your take on that? As you've seen and helped so many hundreds of different businesses, is that really the trend anymore? Or are they going more towards, piece or outsourcing to specific specialties?
Yeah, what we're seeing is a combination of even some virtual assistants, which you can get for relatively low dollar investment to do simple automated kind of tasks. But then also, you talk about hiring, and Kim, I'm sure will weigh in much more effectively on this. But if you think about the breadth of skills and tasks to be an expert in digital marketing and social media, finding one person that is competent across that whole spectrum is really hard. Similarly, you don't need a full-time CFO, but you can find part-time CFOs that work for a number of startups and can at least help you make decisions to avoid getting in trouble or hitting one of the debtbergs that we talk about. So I think that diversified expertise typically comes from different people, and there are either kind of fractional employees and feeling that pressure. not only to hire somebody full time, but also that there seems to be, at least in some circles, kind of this assumption that to be a quote real entrepreneur, you need to go raise $1 million, you need to go after venture capital. The first question, or at least one of the first questions we always ask when people say, I need to raise money, I need some feedback on my idea, or what are your goals? Are your goals to grow a venture funded organization and have the pressure of growing it exponentially and then selling it, et cetera, going through some kind of exit? And in many cases, that's not really what they want. They want more freedom. They want more flexibility in how they spend their time. And they have something they're passionate about that they want to accomplish. And you can be a very successful entrepreneur without going out and raising a bunch of money and taking on investors and doing all of that. So those are some of those early decisions that I think are really important. And as you say, I would say one of the most painful moments we see with entrepreneurs is the first time they can't make payroll. I mean, raising money is hard, getting the first customer is hard, but when you take on full-time employees who are really part of your family as well as your work life, and then a customer leaves, payments slow from them, and you've got to push back or even not be able to make payroll that first time. That is so painful and so hard. And you want to try and build the organization in a sustainable way so it doesn't come to that.
I like that. I want to go back to something you said as well. You talked about the blue ocean, and we talked, there's a red ocean, there's a blue ocean, and the blue ocean, I love your background because I'm very visual. And so you think about that where you have these sharks, and there's only one person now, so all the sharks can come on you. And a lot of people don't know and they can't find you. And so what is your recommendation if I were listening to this podcast, getting ready to start, and I think this idea, and it's not necessarily, it's a purple ocean, I guess, right? It's red and blue combined where there's room for advancement, but what do you recommend I do to be able to get more clients?
Yeah, so I think what's appealing about the blue ocean strategy is that there are a few examples where it worked really well. And so everyone's like, oh, let's try to do that. Okay. But coming up with the exact, like you said, some things work in some industries and sometimes they don't. What's the likelihood that you're going to hit on the thing that's going to be the next successful blue ocean? So instead, what I always suggest, and it goes all the way back to FedEx, right? So when FedEx was created, nobody ever heard about getting a document overnight, right? And so they were really creating a whole new category. You could have been a blue ocean if you wanted to, but what they did is they said, this is mail, except you get it in 24 hours. That people can understand. Okay, there was a US Post Office and now there's some new thing. And, eventually we've had UPS and DHL and all kinds of other services, right? Or you could say a courier service, except you can get it on the other side of the country, right? Because we know couriers are local. So pick something that people already know and are comfortable with. And actually, you could probably even identify what are the defining attributes. Like I often use this example in my class, fast food. We all know what fast food is, right? It's quick, it's tasty, it's probably between $5 and $10, maybe even under $5. It's super convenient to get, and it's probably not the healthiest for you, right? Those are defining attributes. So anytime I say fast food, I'm going to get all that, right? So name a category where people are very familiar, probably know the main attributes, and then find one attribute where you are better than everybody else. And so I love the example of, Jimmy John's. Hopefully everybody knows this. I mean, they're freaky fast because fast is part of fast food. You have to be extraordinary to own one of those. So they call themselves freaky fast. I mean, it's a sandwich, right? But it is really fast food, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's healthy, right?
Right.
So if I'm starting out and now I'm thinking, how do I want to structure my business? So a lot of times people don't understand the difference between an LLC and a C Corp, an S Corp, so a partnership. What do you recommend? And where should they go to find out more information about that?
Well, I will start by saying we are far from experts on, and those
tax.
both have a local and or state component, and also do change on a somewhat regular basis. So there's no one right form of organization to choose for any kind of mompreneur or other entrepreneur. It really comes back to, again, what your goals are, and then seeking the advice of either one of those part-time or fractional chief financial officers, or even start with your
Lawyers.
accountant or attorney that knows this space. Often there are incubators in a lot of areas, or places that kind of cater to startups that will have a series of talks featuring different kinds of expertise. So an attorney will come in and talk about general forms of structure, and then you have a chance to interact directly with them, or at least go through Q&A. So again, I'd be uncomfortable offering kind of blanket advice of here's what you should do, but you should definitely seek the appropriate expertise. And there are a variety of ways to do that, either for free or relatively inexpensively.
But I do think it's important to say that there are things that differentiate these. So for example, it's probably easiest and most convenient to start an LLC, relatively easy to do, pretty low cost. A lot of attorneys can do it. You might even be able to do it on your own. I'm not sure I would, but you could. And that's great, but then you're probably not going to get venture funding, because in order to get venture funding, you're going to move from an LLC to, you know, a C corp. And then the other thing to recognize is an S corp has some benefits in terms of how you can manage your taxes, because you pay yourself, you take it off the corporate. I don't want to get into all the complexities. But at the same time, that can be very limiting in that the IRS does demand that you pay yourself fairly. So I know, you know, an architect who was an S corp and then paid herself below market, you know, and so the IRS frowns on that. So it is a tricky decision, and you really do need to get the kind of professional help to do that. And it's pretty cheap. Your Small Business Administration, the SCORE folks, they have some people who help. There's always attorneys in a city who sort of specialize in low cost policies for startups. So they have like packages. So instead of just paying an hourly rate, they bundle it all up. I can, you know, do your articles of incorporation and your annual meeting and, you know, whatever for one low price. So that seek out the help for that.
And I think that that's the important thing is when you're, I talk to so many small business owners and they don't want to spend any money. And I think, okay, well, you're wanting to make money, right? Then you need to spend some money to make sure that you get it set up correctly and that you're protecting yourself. Because if you don't, then you could be paying so much more in the end. I was recently, there was somebody that I think he was on the hook for about $400,000 in tax. Wow. Because his lady that was doing all the bills and stuff, they didn't have the money, so she just wasn't paying the taxes each year. And so he was facing a $400,000 tax bill. He told the story in a conference last week, and you just think, okay, had he done some things and invested the way that he should have, you should never shortcut those type of things, because when it comes to legal, it's not just a slap on the hand and a fine, it's years in prison. And so those are things that you really, if you want to take this seriously and you're really thinking of growing, then you really need to make sure that you get the people on your boat that are there to help you make decisions, and they're there to protect you. And it might be expensive up front, and expensive could be $1,000 or $1,500, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to what you're hoping to make later.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I don't think that that's too expensive for starting a business. I mean, it's starting a business. You should be willing to invest, you know, $1,000, $1,500. And every city we've ever lived in, there's somebody who will do all that work for $1,500 as a package. It's pretty typical. Yeah. And so you just need to be aware of those costs. I mean, we did put together a blog post that was like, here are all the steps to create a business. This was in Indiana. I mean, you need to do all those steps. You need to file the form with the state. You need to register your business. You need to get the sales tax. Oh, I know somebody who didn't get their sales tax certification and pay sales tax. Mm-hmm. You need to do those things because they will come back and haunt you.
Yeah. They'll always find you, right?
Oh, they'll always find you.
So talk to me about this new law that actually just came out. So new businesses that start up, they have to report to the IRS, right? Within a certain amount of time. Are you familiar with that and how it came?
I don't know which specific law, because the latest law I saw was that the amount of money you could raise before kind of falling under SEC has been increased, which was kind of exciting because it was, I think, 10 million went to 12 million. But I don't know what this new law that you're mentioning is.
That you have to basically go in and tell everything about the business. It used to be where you could just start a business with the state and call it good, but now you have to get online and report it to the IRS, and do all these things or you can get in trouble. So it's Big Brother's watching even more. And so I forgot the name of it, but I didn't know if you were familiar with that or not. So
That's interesting. And it's kind of like filing for a patent, right? That until you really know what you have, it's very hard to appropriately structure a patent. And then you're disclosing a bunch of stuff that could become public information to potential competitors, et cetera. So there are real trade-offs there, but particularly, and again, thank you for informing us about this. We'll look into it more. But, you know, startups are always pivoting or moving in new directions on a pretty regular basis. So you can imagine if you're, you know, okay, well, I'm going to start this company. I'm going to describe it and go into, you know, a fair amount of detail about some of the specifics of the organization. And 3 months later, half of those could be changed, not because you were trying to avoid anything. You're actually doing the right thing as a founder. But you often have to move in new directions. So that's interesting.
yeah, I didn't know about it until my accountant came and said, okay, Charisse, have you opened new companies? Because I'm always a new company. And I said, yeah, I actually just registered one in January because it was for my book, right? So I opened up a publishing company and self-published. And he's like, okay, are you aware that you have 90 days to report this to the government? And I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, you got to go back and do all those other reportings for all your other companies as well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, they're giving a pass for the ones previous, but yeah, any new startups now, you have to go online to a certain, I'll find the link and I'll send it to you, but a certain.
Well, I think I might have found it. It looks like it's part of the transparency in business, and you've got to go to this group called FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
Yeah.
That's not at all scary or intimidating.
No. And what's kind of interesting is you can waive out of it if you have more than 20 employees and more than $5 million in sales. But that leaves $32 million businesses that can't get out of it, and that are these small businesses. So yikes. Yeah. And it traces back to you personally, as opposed to like hiding behind an LLC.
Yeah, it's scary. Like there's so many new things coming on and nobody's talking about this stuff. And so thank you for looking it up.
Yeah.
It is. I remember having to fill this out going, oh my gosh, if you want to stay off the radar, you cannot if you own a business.
Well, they're trying to find people who are money laundering. And so the other piece of it, they wanted to have a report, the IRS wanted reporting on any transaction over $600 through PayPal and Zelle. So that's what's coming next, but they delayed it because they can't enforce it. So I think that's going to be the next thing. So those handymen that you've been paying through Zelle or Venmo, they're going to shut those down.
And let's be honest, they probably should, because there's a lot of stuff that's going on under the ground that, yeah. I have so many different opinions about everything, but we won't go there.
Well, I mean, we get it. When we were in Indiana, there was no sales tax on services. So, you know, had all these services, never collected any sales tax. Now we're in New York and there's an 8.75% on services. So now all of a sudden everybody wants cash, right?
No, nobody does that.
Nobody does that. Nobody does that.
That's true. Now it'll just go to cash instead of the electronic stuff. So I mean, that's a good point that you made, is from state to state, everything differs. And so where can you go to find out if I open up a new company or I expand to a new state? What are those changes? Where do you recommend people go?
Chambers of Commerce is probably the best starting point, and many of them will have links to either like an SBDC, a Small Business Development Center, or some other, SBA. So there is a wealth of information available. It just, again, it takes a lot of time and energy to identify that. You had talked about a person you worked with who had expertise, and you were kind of trying to follow the playbook. And I would say and encourage any particularly first-time founder, find a mentor, find someone who has been through the journey that you are taking, connect with them. in our experience, people are extraordinarily kind and generous with their time to help others who are kind of following in their footsteps. And what could take you 6 months to a year and some mistakes that you end up either financially or otherwise paying for could cost you a cup of coffee in a week if you connect with the right person in your community. And I think entrepreneurs sometimes can feel kind of isolated and it's a hard and feels like a lonely journey, but there are a lot of other people out there who have not only been through that journey, but do want to help and do want to reach back out. So try and cultivate those relationships, go to places where entrepreneurs kind of hang out and find people that are like-minded and you can connect with, and they can help identify both individuals, but also some of these mistakes that they made perhaps and learned hard lessons from.
So I do think some co-working spaces do offer these kinds of, events and learnings and mentors. And so that's a good place to check out. I will also say that at least when we were in Indiana, most of the states have like a governance group. And I was online for our book. I was setting up our company and also trying to get the sales tax because I figured we were going to sell some and I'd have to report sales tax and all that good stuff. I didn't want to, be in trouble. Professor gets in trouble kind of thing. And I could not figure this out at all. I mean, I'm like, I am pretty tech savvy. I've been doing this a long time. I don't want to talk to anybody. And so I just randomly in the middle of the day ended up calling the office because I was like, I don't understand this or that. And I got this woman who has been working there for 20 years. And she says, get out a piece of paper. And I guarantee you that I did get out a piece of paper. And she's like, I am going to go through every screen with you. You follow along and write this down so you have the notes for the future. And then she'd be like, on this one, do not check this box because this means you have to do blah, blah, blah. And instead, if you check this box, you only have to send the sales tax in once a year and, and then do this. And then now that you submitted this, here's what's going to happen next. Like you're going to wait 2 weeks and in 2 weeks, you're going to come back and then you go through these 3 steps and bingo, there it all was. And I was like, if I had not found this woman, I would still be trying to figure out how to set up my sales tax license.
That is amazing. And I honestly thought you were going to tell me that she was been working there for 20 years and bitter and angry and tired. And but I will tell you, a lot of those people, because you're expecting them, the government employees, they are incredibly helpful and very nice. And they have your best interest at heart. And so it does not hurt to pick up a phone.
Right. And I do a lot of begging, like, this is going to sound really stupid, but I really need your help. I have no idea what I'm doing, and then of course they feel like they have to help. And every time they do something, irrespective of whether I liked it or not, I go, wow, that's so helpful. I really appreciate you.
No, and it's good. And if you want to get even better, send your name, send a thank you card, hope that they
right.
get it. My daughter, when she graduated, she wants to go into film. And when she graduated, she took my advice and she just called. I think she said she called 150 people in the industry. And she met with several, but this one guy, he took her under her wing and hired her full time, paid her incredibly well, and said, I want you to be successful. So you can learn anything and everything from me. And so she's been in a lot of movies and helping on the sets. And awesome. So there are people, you talk about find a mentor. I cannot stress that enough. And you don't have to pay them $25,000 to do it. There's a lot that are willing to do it for much less than that.
In fact, if you are paying them $25,000, they're not a mentor.
Yeah.
They're a coach.
Yes. Well, you're right. That's a great point.
But they might call themselves a mentor. So I think we haven't mentioned universities as a resource, but they can be very helpful, not just with interns, but like student class projects around marketing, market research, even funding and financing. So connect with universities. We often say, we think an entrepreneur is 5 degrees of separation or 5 people away from being successful. The challenge is, as you pointed out with your daughter, that might be 150 phone calls and 6 months of effort. But if you can find people like you who are pretty well connected with a variety of types of resources, you can really shorten that journey. So if you're 4 or 5 degrees of separation from those 5 people who can help you be successful, if you can get that down to 1 or 2 degrees of separation, you can really increase decrease the amount of time, but increase the likelihood of being able to move forward productively.
Such great advice. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I mean, there's so many golden nuggets that I hope that people picked up, our listeners did, because that's one thing that people don't tap into enough. And we talk about video a lot in marketing, as you talk about, and a university where those are their classes and those are their projects. What better way to find a good editor that is not going to be that expensive, that are trying to build their portfolio.
Right.
So no, it's such good advice. Okay, so my last question, which is going to be a little odd, because there's two of you now. So I want you to imagine yourself sitting on a park bench, and you're talking to, we'll switch it up a little if you've heard my podcast. We're talking to a very, very just newbie entrepreneur that's like, they have their idea and that's all. What do you recommend, and what advice would you give them now that you've been through it and you've learned so much and you've been involved in so many things? What do they need to know?
Well, get out there and talk to customers. You have to validate your idea. And I don't mean one or two customers. I mean a whole bunch of strangers. Ask, a whole bunch of strangers, what problems, not, do you have this problem? Is this a good solution? But ask them what problems they have. I mean, one of the biggest challenges we find with small businesses and new businesses is, are they solving a problem that is aspirin or jewelry or oxygen?
Mm-hmm.
And what you want are oxygen problems, right? People can't breathe without oxygen. The second best is probably aspirin, right? They're not going to kill them, but they want to feel a little better. So you just need to know what problems people have, and especially what are those oxygen problems? Because if you can solve the oxygen problems, you're going to get the fastest uptake and you'll get the biggest premium.
And I, just to build on that, because I think that's a great answer and the right one, but how long have they been sitting on that park bench? How many times have they been trying to come up with the right idea? And that's where we started. They have this idea and that's where they're starting. And if you start with trying to come up with an idea, that's actually much harder than identifying a problem that you really care about. And if you care about that problem and you identify people who have that problem and are trying to solve it, you're much more likely to come up with a solution that is oxygen or at least aspirin. And you will know the terminology that you're using or they're using to describe the problem, and also kind of what they're looking for. So don't develop those ideas in isolation. Get out there and interact.
That is fantastic advice, because I, on social media sometimes, and there's this guy that comes up, I don't even know his name, but he comes up and he has all these ideas and he goes, have you ever thought about this? And so this is right after the Trump attempted assassination. And he goes, there's so many people that are coming up, and like it's that one picture where his fist is up and the Secret Service are around him. And so he goes, capitalize on this right now. People are buying tons of t-shirts. Just go take the image, slap it on a t-shirt and get it out and sell it. And I'm like, wow, people are doing that all the time. And it doesn't have to be just that. But you talk about what is the problem? What is your solution? And get out there. And what great advice, because you're right. A lot of people sit on the park bench trying to decide what they want to do.
Or waiting for Charisse to sit next to them so they can ask you to tell them what to do.
Right, right.
My favorite was, I want to be an entrepreneur. What business do you think I should start?
Yeah, we got a lot of students too.
Do you?
Yeah.
If I knew the answer to that, I'd start it myself and we would no longer be talking.
Right, that's true. And I wouldn't be here. All right, so what is one of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your entrepreneurial journey or helping other people?
Just keep moving forward. Even if it's slowly, but and this is true with research projects, this is true with any relationship, that if you just stop moving, things start to stagnate, and it's re-energizing and getting momentum to start again becomes really hard. So even if it's just a small step, take that small step every day to keep things moving forward.
So I would say that I see too many entrepreneurs who are always just going it alone, and ask for help. You just never know who's going to be willing to do it. Don't think that it all has to be you. In fact, you should be asking yourself, how can I get someone else to do this for me?
Who, not how, right?
Right.
Such good advice, and it's so true. And I think that that's the big thing is you're right. A lot of people do try to do it on their own, and they do wait for to be spoon-fed because that's what our education system, not college anymore,
Right.
but
Some.
well, I don't want to be offensive, but you're right. I mean, they walk in, they sit down, and they stare straight ahead, and they expect to be taught something. And it's like, okay, how many of you read the chapter before you walked in this class? And how many of you, they just want to be spoon-fed. They don't want to put in the work. And entrepreneurship, it takes work.
Yes.
Yep.
Our listeners
Also, I tell students as I'm interviewing them, also don't think you have to do all of your college on your own either. Band together. Everybody else is doing the same thing you're doing. You can solve these problems together better than you can solve them on your own.
It's true. And what you heard or didn't hear, somebody else did. And so if you get together, it's much better when you're starting.
Yep.
Well, if our listeners wanted to find you, how would they do that?
Well, the best thing is to go to the University of Buffalo website and the faculty. You can find us there, Kim Saxton and Todd Saxton. And also you can check out our book website at titaniceffect.com. People email us through the website all the time. It's always super fun. So we're easily accessible.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Appreciate you're asking.
And moms and men, if you are thinking of starting a business, I hope that you took some golden nuggets from the show and really listened and understand you do not have to go it alone, and trust yourself and make sure that you move forward. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then share it with somebody else, like and subscribe, and have a fantastic day. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.